I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
Big Money Siege. I'm not going to get you to do the whole, the sky is falling in Toronto. I think the Steve Dangle podcast did a terrific job at assessing what's going on in Toronto. That doesn't mean we're not going to talk about it. But it had me thinking, because you're obviously in Toronto, you're covering that team. I'm in Calgary, and as of this recording, they are undefeated. Things are going well in one market. Things are not going so well in one market. If you had to pick, would you rather cover a team that's doing really well or doing really badly? I'm curious.
Well, let's be honest. There's a little more sizzle to the stories around a team that's doing maybe underperforming or doing poorly. There's a limit to that, though. Like if you're going to cover the last place team in the league, after a while, and I have covered that team before in the Leafs.
Me too.
What year is that? 2014, 15, I think it was, or 15, 16. Anyway, eventually fans completely disengage from the day-to-day of the team because it's pretty clear where everything's going. I think ultimately what we're looking to do, though, is we want people to care about the content we're putting out. And part of care in sports is Steve Dangle yelling into his camera, right? It's people that are so frustrated, so fed up. I mean, that's its own sign of love, if you will. That's its own side of commitment to a team. And so I think sometimes a team where things are going a little sideways, it is more compelling. I actually don't think, and I mean this truthfully, I don't think it's the worst thing for teams to have that happen. I mean, I hate the word adversity. I feel like it's so thrown around all the time, and it's kind of a catch-all. It's not really specific, but I think you got to go through some shit, man. Any team that has any amount of success has to find itself, has to have some tough moments, has to have a period where it looks like everything is going awful, and then they find a way within their group or within the systematic play they use on the ice to get it back on track. And so, I think it's most compelling in sports, quite honestly, when you're covering teams that are swerving all over the place. But the beauty is we don't get to control it, right? The Flames haven't lost a game. That has nothing to do with you. And the Leafs lost to the Coyotes. Oh, wait, everybody seems to think that has something to do with me because
it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You had an opinion. It didn't go your way. You didn't jinx the Leafs. Stop it. I mean, stop it to people who think that.
I know. I'm having some fun with it. But the truth is we just sort of observe and talk about what happens, write about what happens. But I think it's more compelling if it's all good. I mean, that's kind of like if every story you're writing is like, this guy's awesome, this line's working, the coach is pushing all the right buttons. Like people, it sounds weird. I think people get bored of that too. Sports are a fickle, funny beast. But I'll tell you, I was in the arena on Monday night when the Leafs lost to Arizona. I actually had a couple fans come up of our pod, but then they just were so frustrated. It would be like Steve Dangle on steroids. And I think there is a heavy amount of frustration around the Leafs, but I'm actually not that sure what the current team can do other than sort of get its act together and win games. But I don't, as we know, I just don't. People are freaking out after one game, but it's the same people that said the regular season doesn't matter and just tell us what happens in the playoffs. So they're kind of in a no-win situation, I think, where the Leafs are at. And I don't blame the fans. I really don't. I get it. It's been a big, long build, and there hasn't been much release. There hasn't been much excitement. And I don't think the sky is falling though. I actually have no concerns about the team in the short term. But it's been a kind of spicy first 9 or 10 days of the season here.
Jeez. Would you, looking at the Leafs situation, comparing it to the Canucks situation, who do you think has it worse?
The Canucks, because they're 0-4, at least as we're recording this. And, I think that the concerns about the Canucks probably heading to the offseason, heading into training camp, heading to the regular season were their ability to defend. And what are we talking about? This record they've set where they've blown multi-goal leads in 4 straight games to start a season, the first team ever. Well, a product of that is not being able to lock the game down, to not defend well enough. It hasn't all come against teams that we expect to be the best teams in the league either. And so I think I have a bigger concern there. I mean, you could take the glass half full approach though and say, well, at least they've built leads in those games. I mean, the Canucks clearly can score. Elias Pettersson's had a nice start individually to the season. I can see them. I can see the path back to them getting it on track, but losing 4 games out of the gate, as much as there's 78 remaining, it does build, dig a little bit of a hole for them. And my view on Vancouver the whole time entering the season was that they were going to be touch and go to make the playoffs as it was. And so I think it was more imperative for them. Look, it can still happen. I mean, they're one really good week away from sort of being like, okay, maybe this is stabilized. But we saw last year with the Canucks, and it cost some people their jobs. I mean, they really struggled for 2 months. And as well as they played from that point on after hiring Bruce Boudreau, they weren't able to really, truly get into the playoff mix. And so, I think they have to turn this around like yesterday. I don't see them having much margin for error at this point.
I've got a few more questions about Bruce Boudreau and about Sheldon Keefe and Mitch Marner, among some other NHL news and notes like Aaron Ekblad and Jacob Chikrin and the salary cap going up. We can get to those on the other side of our sports interaction segment. It'll just be you and me because David Bastel not available for us today. As always, if you're playing with Sports Interaction, it's for those 19 and over, Ontario only. We ask that you play responsibly, and there will be a link to responsible gaming strategies in the description of this show. It's time for You Can Bet That. Welcome to You Can Bet That with David. He's not here. So it's just myself and Chris Johnston for You Can Bet That. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. I learned in preparation for this show last night that there is a prop on the website that is up there because of the work of our friends at the Steve Dangle podcast.
They've got sway, man. They've got power.
They do. A prop on the Vancouver Canucks. The Canucks lose after leading 2 goals or more. You could say yes. The odds there at plus 496 or no at minus 824. Very interesting one that we have that prop there. And the no side seems to be the favorite. If should the Canucks lose after leading by 2 goals or more? We know they've blown so many of these multi-goal leads. There's no way they do it a 5th time, right?
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine that. I mean, although I got to say, after they did it a 3rd time and then went into Columbus this week, I thought there's no way it happens again. And lo and behold, here we are. So I suppose anything is possible under the sun. But I have to think they're going to get it on track one way or another, or perhaps they're in such a spiral they just don't lead by 2. I mean, you need 2 distinct events to happen to win that prop, and that's a tough one.
That is a very tough one. I don't know off top of my head. Okay, they're playing the Minnesota Wild tonight. I sort of forgot what team they were going to play against today, but I just remembered now. The Minnesota Wild is that team. The Leafs, they're favored against the Dallas Stars tonight. Minus 174 for the Leafs, plus 145 for Dallas. What do you think?
Well, I keep getting myself in trouble with these ones. So,
yeah, actually, sorry, my bad. I shouldn't have asked you this one.
I think you're looking for a bounce back, though, for Toronto, obviously, with the lost to Arizona, a couple days of melodrama in the marketplace, I'll call it. We saw them lose on opening night in Montreal, get called out and bounce back against Washington the next day. I think with the Leafs are the more rested team. I mean, the schedule's in their favor, and I think there's some circumstances here that command that they have a much better performance than we saw earlier in the week.
Finally, the Sabres and Flames. That is going down at the Saddle Dome tonight in Calgary. The Flames are favored over the Sabres. Flames at minus 288, Sabres plus 238. What do you think about that matchup?
Don't sleep on the Sabres. 1-1 in Edmonton earlier this week, so you never know. I mean, look, there's so many games, a lot can happen, and maybe Calgary, all the great coverage that you're giving them, Julian, they're going to get a little big in their britches and take the opponent for granted here.
Oh yeah, me, a good luck charm. As they are 3. You know this? They are 3-0-0. For the first time. Actually, they won a season opening game for the first time in 13 years. Like in 2009, that's the last time the Flames won the first game of the year before this year. Did you know that?
I did not. I mean, Jerome McGinley would have been doing post-game interviews that day. Like that's how long. Mika Kiprasov probably played net. I don't have the stats in front of me, but it's a long time. It's a generation of Flames ago.
Seriously, like it's like the roster definitely, you're right. Like McGinley was on that team. I'm sure Kiprasov might have been the goalie on that team. I'm not going to go through every single player on that team, but it's still very. Michael Backlund was on that team. Holy crap! Vesa Toskala was on that team. Anyway, it's hilarious. Mika Kiprasov was in fact on that team. Anyway, that's going to do it for Sports Interaction. Thanks for joining us on You Can Bet That. Saw David Bastel. Don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. Again, sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. Let's go through some more news and notes. I did say I had a few more questions with regards to the Leafs and the Canucks. We can start with the Leafs. One situation we did not get into, Sheldon Keefe's comments. I said I didn't like him talking after that Canadiens game. He said something after the Arizona Coyotes game, the big one ringing in everyone's ears. The difference between us and Arizona is that we have elite players, and our elite players didn't play like elite players. It seems as if Sheldon Keefe had to walk that back, and Mitch Marner talked to Sheldon Keefe about that after he said what he said. What do you make of this whole Sheldon Keefe saying things and having to clarify stuff? And, it just seems like a bit of a mess right now in Toronto.
It certainly doesn't present well publicly, but I think we have to keep in mind, like, it's the coach's job to push the guys.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue there are a few teams, there's a couple others, it's not Toronto only, but like the urgency in this season for the Leafs has to be at, Mach 10. It has to be at absolute panic levels. I mean, we've discussed it already on the pod. I mean, everything is on the table this coming summer, depending on how this season goes. You have a GM without a contract beyond the year. You have a coach that's very much tied to his GM. You have star players that, like Austin Matthews and William Nylander, that can sign extensions this summer. You've got about 10 players, give or take, on the active roster right now that are pending unrestricted free agents. I mean, there's just no security to be found around the Leafs. So I don't mind Sheldon Keefe pushing buttons. And the thing is what he said after Arizona is true. Through 4 games, Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner aren't on the first page of the NHL scoring list. And they've been there basically their entire careers. I would expect they'll be there in pretty due course and for the rest of this season too. But at the start of this year, those guys haven't broken through and put up a bunch of goals and points. I don't know that he's saying that's exactly why they're losing, but clearly that's the difference maker between Toronto and some of the teams they play, is having those kind of talents. I mean, Austin Matthews scored 51 goals in 50 game stretch last year. That's 1 goal a game that he's good for. Like, you start the game up 1-0 because Austin Matthews is in your lineup. That again, I don't have concerns about Matthews and Marner specifically. I think that it will just come that they haven't found their rhythm yet. But I also don't think there's any harm in being honest about what's going on the ice. And, I kind of like this version of Sheldon Keefe. It's a little bit risky. I think that, just because if you pull out, you fire the verbal bullet after game 1, now you're sort of calling out some of your bigger guys after game 4. And I do know he walked the comments back a little bit on Wednesday, but, kind of what's done is done there. You get to a point, is how many more moves or tricks do you have to try to elicit a reaction? And it is a long season, but also, look, no one here can just be like, it's just 1 game. I think the Leafs really do have to take some steps forward. It's not to say that there's obviously going to be losses for every team. There's going to be the odd night where they're playing the 4th game in 6 days and maybe they don't have a lot of pop in the legs. And I think there's sort of explainable things that can happen. Although ironically that game against Arizona was the 4th game in 6 days to start the season. Maybe there was a little bit of element of that no one here is really discussing about the team. But I don't have any problem with him, putting his cards on the table, pushing the guys, because I think ultimately that's his job. And I don't think anyone here should be here, being in Toronto, should be just like, oh, well, they'll be fine. I mean, I do think that they will find their way. But, Sheldon Keefe doesn't want them to get 115 points. He wants them to win the President's Trophy. He wants them to show that they're even better than they were last year. And so far out of the gate, that hasn't been the case.
Man, I don't look. I'll tell you what. There are a lot of Leafs fans who would trade a President's Trophy for a first round win. Sorry. Congrats.
Well,
you want a team that's going to win the President's Trophy, and you still can't get out the first round. Like, sorry.
I get that that's the fans' view, but if you're the team, what can you do, right? Like their last two seasons, last year and the year before, were the best seasons by points percentage in franchise history. So they've already accomplished things in the regular season that's never been done before. I think that they have to set the bar higher, because you have to go through 6 or 7 months before you can win a playoff game. And obviously, if you win the President's Trophy, you're going to get most likely a more favorable first round matchup. I mean, part of losing every year in the first round is they've had some pretty tough opponents. Well, one way you could tilt that a little more in your favor is by playing the weakest team in the conference, and the only way to do that is by having the best record in the regular season.
And they still lost when they had that opportunity to beat the weakest team in their division. In all fairness, but still, like, I really. After that loss to Montreal earlier this year, I really was just like, you know what, man, it's just one game. That Arizona game, I'm not a Leafs fan, but I totally understand. Like, what the hell, man? Like, it's so frustrating. Like, you can't get up for Arizona. You can't get up for a team that's supposed to be bad. Like, I don't get why. Like, I don't get why that should happen. And I think for the Leafs, they really need to get their shit together, or else by Thanksgiving, there's going to be changes some way or another. And I mean, American Thanksgiving, but like, it's ridiculous. Enough is enough.
I get it. I'm not pushing back on that idea, but they were 2-4-1 last year to start the year. And then I think they lost one game in November. They basically won all of November, and it was moot. I'm not saying it has to be quite to that level of turnaround now, but it won't surprise me at all if they just reel off 5 or 6 straight wins. And maybe it's tough from this point in the schedule, because after, playing Dallas on Thursday, they're in Winnipeg Saturday, then they go to Vegas, and they're in the California trip. It's a long road trip, probably tough to string together a bunch of wins in all those buildings. But, in general, I think that by American Thanksgiving, they're probably going to be fine. But I agree with your premise. If we're 20 games into this season and they're sort of hovering around 500 or that's basically the circumstances that were in place 3 years ago when Mike Babcock got fired. He got fired in November when they were roughly 21 games into that season and just kind of going nowhere, not being dominant. And so, I'm not saying it's necessarily the coach. I don't know how it's going to play out. As I say, I think that there's a number of potential scenarios here, and nobody should feel too confident about their position with the organization. Unless your name is Matthews or Marner. I mean, pretty sure those guys aren't being traded in any midseason trades, but beyond that, it's a lot will have to be considered, and they don't have time to figure it out. It does have to happen immediately. And I think that's reflected in the urgency of some of Sheldon Keefe's comments and the way he's pushing his team. Is he wants the guys not to have that mindset that, oh well, like we'll just, we'll get our stuff going. Like I think that it has to happen, starting now and be there for a prolonged, consistent period of time.
Anything else about the Leafs you want to add before I move on to the Vancouver Canucks?
I'm probably good. I'm sure we'll be talking again by Monday. There'll be some other new storyline we're on there. So
I'm sure. But with the Canucks, we've already mentioned the fact that things are not going too well for them. What do you think that might mean for Bruce Boudreau's future? Do you think he should be filling the hot seat in Vancouver right now?
Well, there's no question he's feeling the hot seat. I mean, he's been around a long time. He entered this season not with a lot of security on his contract, and there's some expectations there. And then you blow 4 straight 2-goal leads. I don't think don't mix my words. I don't think he's in danger of being fired today, but certainly that seat got a lot warmer in the last 2 weeks or 10 days with that kind of start. And it's imperative that they find a way to reverse course, or maybe they'll find themselves in that position where they're making a change. I mean, he's in a weird spot, right? He was brought in last season, I would say got a pretty good reaction out of the roster and certainly put together a long winning stretch with the team. Didn't, then he's got new bosses above him in management, doesn't get a contract extension last summer. I mean, we're not even a whole year into his tenure and we're already speculating about his job. And I think part of it is just there's this idea that he doesn't have a lot of security there. So, a win in Minnesota will calm things down, and a few wins in a row will really probably settle the situation. But if the Canucks aren't able to sort of reverse course, you're only going to hear those talks get a little bit louder around him. And the Canucks, I don't know where they go next. They have Mike Yeo on their staff, who's coached in the NHL, coached last year on an interim basis in Philadelphia as a head coach. Maybe that's where they look. If not, I mean, I don't know that they have a coaching issue though. It's still to me is a roster construction issue. Jim Rutherford's been pretty open about some of the challenges he was left with from the previous regime, namely a lot of big contracts just barely crammed under the cap without a lot of room to sort of pivot and change direction quickly. And so, maybe it comes down to a coach being changed there, but I think that there has to be larger changes. And I do believe they know that. It's just, you can't wave a wand and do it overnight. It's, usually a multi-year process for a new general manager or president, in the case of Rutherford, to come in and really, change the look of an organization.
Man, Vancouver, a team that is still really intrigued about that direction, because I was under the impression that they weren't going to be all in this year, and then they signed JT Miller to that contract. Now they're fighting with Calgary, Edmonton, LA, and Vegas in that division to try and fight and make the playoffs. Like, they're in a really intriguing spot in Vancouver. And I mean, they're not off to a great start. We know that. It's just, they're in a really interesting spot.
Well, look, it's weird because they have Elias Pettersson and they have Quinn Hughes and Thatcher Demko, and they have players who are sort of star level players, and they're not young guys anymore. I mean, they're still young, and they have years where they're still going to be in what I would call their primes, but there's a internal push to try to build the right team around those players to have a chance to win while they're at their best. And it might not be able to happen. I mean, I think that's, the crux of the problem is that they have to find a way to be competitive while these guys are difference makers, and they're starting at a deficit. The blue line, it needs a new look. I think it needs some new horses back there, but they're locked in on some pretty big contracts with players on the wrong side of their best years. And so, that's kind of where we're at. And ultimately, I guess the coach, what have we seen? 13 coaching changes, I think, in the last 12 months, roughly. I mean, almost half the teams in the league have turned over their head coach in the last year. So the coach is often the one who takes the fall. But, I think anyone with a step back from that situation is looking at Vancouver and saying there's much bigger issues here than Bruce Boudreau.
Okay, let's go from Vancouver to someplace warm, like the Florida Panthers. Aaron Ekblad, unfortunately, on long-term injured reserve due to a lower body injury. What's next for the Florida Panthers, or any other insight and thoughts on Aaron Ekblad going on LTIR?
Well, what's interesting here is the Panthers are one of the teams that entered this season with basically no cap space to speak of whatsoever. They've already played one game short of skater, as Edmonton did on open night, as other teams will this year because of cap constraints. What putting Ekblad on LTIR does in the short term, it does give them ability to spend some money and replace him while he's out injured. But the fact of the matter is it's not considered a long term enough injury where they can really go out and try to, not to replacing an Ekblad, but even add a $4 or $5 million defenseman. It's not going to be possible, because when Ekblad would be healthy to play, you've got to find a way to fit that in under the cap and into the team. And I don't think they can do it. And so, Florida, when you look at it, and any team that loses their number one D, they're going to look way worse when you go and check their lineup after that happens. But they've got a really tough looking back end right now. Quite frankly, I mean, they lost Mackenzie Weegar too to Calgary as part of that trade to get Matthew Tkachuk, and so that's a couple of the horses that were on their back end out the door. And the Panthers are off to a decent start to the season. So, there's nothing to suggest here they can't weather it, but I think they kind of have to weather the storm until Ekblad is back and healthy, because they're just not in a position with the cap where they can make the kind of move I'm sure Bill Zito wants to make. We've seen him be very active as a general manager when it comes to trades, but this is a tough one early in the year, and I don't think they'll be alone. I mean, I guess one thing we could have touched on with the Leafs, of course, is that Jake Muzzin went out with an injury earlier this week, and they're kind of in a similar spot. There's not, depending on the length of that injury, there's just not a lot that they can do short term. That they're trying to get by with guys like Jordy Ben or Victor Mete. For Florida, they're using Mark Stahl in their top four, for example, Josh Mahura. They're trying to plug some holes, and this is the reality of a hard cap system. When you get injuries, it's just sometimes the lineups get diluted pretty quickly.
More on the salary cap in a moment, but geez, all this talk of defensemen, it's a damn shame there's no defenseman available for trade. There goes Jacob Chikrin waving his hand, being like, "Hey, I've been in Arizona all this time. Get me out." What's the latest on that?
Well, the latest is he's joining Arizona on its road trip. They're out east here and playing in Montreal Thursday. And Jacob Chikrin is going to start skating and practicing with the team. I think that the thought is he'll need about a week of those skates and practices. And then we're getting to the situation where it just goes by feel in terms of when he might play. But he's taking the next big step towards playing, which I think is very important here because remember, he had an ankle issue at the end of last season. He had off-season wrist surgery, which is what he's recovering from now. And so I think a lot of the teams that have interest in him, we're talking about a 24-year-old defenseman under contract for 2 more seasons beyond this one, relatively cost controlled, is everyone wants to see him play. And what the Coyotes have told Jacob Chikrin is you got to get back and play well. I mean, this trade happens not with him sitting, in the medical room or doing bag skates. This trade happens when he gets back in the lineup and shows the best version of himself. Gives the scouts that from the teams that are interested a chance to see him and have some comfort about where he's at physically. And so that's kind of where it is. I'd say you're sort of in a holding pattern when it comes to trade talks, but it's an exciting time for Chikrin because he's getting back to doing what he does. And I think it does pave the way to, perhaps a deal, later this year. I think it's pretty clear in this case, both sides are open to that trade, but when you look at what Niels Lundqvist got in the deal, from the Rangers to Dallas right before the season, we've seen a few other trades for sort of what I call less established defensemen. I mean, this has got to be a big package for the Coyotes to do it. And I think that Chikrin's got to hold up his end of the deal to make that happen now.
I can imagine. Excuse me. I imagine the Leafs could be hard on him. Is there any other team we should look out for in the Jacob Chikrin sweepstakes?
Well, you keep hearing about the Ottawa, connection, right? His family spends time there. Ottawa needs to upgrade its blue line. I mean, there's nothing cooking on that. I think they've tried to see if there's a fit and it hasn't come about, but maybe that happens again. I mean, one aspect of this is Jacob Chikrin wants to go somewhere he feels like he can win or be part of a successful team. And so, that isn't every team in the league. And so, who knows? Columbus has had interest in him in the past. I don't know where the Blue Jackets season will go. Maybe they've moved on from that, but perhaps they get back in it. LA at various points has looked at this. I mean, I think that every team has to at least consider it, just given that he is his age and what his contract is at. I mean, if he performs well, I think you can connect him to a lot of different teams. But right now it sounds like the trade chatter has been pretty quiet because he's dealing with 2 injuries at once, and everyone wants to see what it looks like on the ice when he returns.
Okay, let's talk about the salary cap. Gary Bettman says that the salary cap could be going up by about $4 million into next year. Are you able to add some context to that? Is that actually like a likely number? Is that looking more like an estimate? What can you tell about the salary cap?
Well, this was I would call it a mini bombshell that Gary Bettman dropped us after the Board of Governors meeting this week in New York, mostly because everyone that I'd ever spoken to on this issue was pretty clear that they thought the players would be repaying their debt to the owners through the end of this season and into next year, meaning that we were still a couple years away from a meaningful bump in the cap. The fact that it's now possible for next season, it changes the calculation for some teams as they plan. It changes the calculation for some agents as they think about, their players that are maybe needing new contracts starting in 2023. where those numbers might lie if you get a $4 million bump. And so in terms of the likelihood, the way it was described to me is, I guess the governors were told behind the scenes that the league would have to outperform the current revenue projections to get to that kind of a bump, but that it's not like it's not as though they need to win the lottery here, like that it's within the realm of possibility if things go well at the gate this season. And look, the reason we're in this position for starters is the NHL actually outperformed its revenue targets last year. Last season went better than the league was thinking it might, basically coming out of the pandemic lockdowns. I mean, even last year there were a number of games played in Canada without fans or with very few fans, but knock wood, I think we're in a position where every game is going to have an ability to have the building be full this year, and ticket sales drive a lot of revenue. We have that 32nd team, and so we're in a spot where the cap might go up, which I think first of all will make for a very interesting offseason if it happens, just with every team having a bit more money to spend, maybe a more active free agent period. Maybe more active trading period too, because teams might be able to consider, taking on those contracts. And so this, it's maybe not news that fans at home get all that excited about, but I know a lot of front offices and agents around the league look at that as a positive, and it is a sign in the bigger picture that the business of hockey is moving forward. That we are kind of emerging from that crazy period of our lives starting in March 2020.
That is true. One other news and note to get to before we get to stick taps. Bill Daly also mentioned some European nations are feeling some uneasiness about Russian players in the next World Cup. Obviously, the Ukraine-Russia conflict still ongoing. What do you make of Bill Daly's comments?
Well, they don't surprise me just because, I have a number of, sources and even friends over in Europe. And I can tell you, Julian, in my conversations or texts with them, is a lot of them are surprised at how little attention the sort of Russian element in the NHL is getting here. And the best way I can maybe try to figure that out or explain that is, if you live in Finland, you share a massive, massive border with Russia. In fact, Finland is actually building a wall, a giant wall at its border with Russia right now. And you'll remember, if not to dive too deep into politics, but that was once brought up in a recent, U.S. presidential election, that idea. And that very thing's actually happening in Finland as we speak. And so, there's a real tension there if you're living in Finland, sharing a border with a country that, has invaded another country. I can understand that. I think even if you're Swedish or Czech, I mean, you're the proximity to the conflict, I think changes your views on it, or changes your, maybe what you think the response should be. And look, even Dominik Hasek, was quite outspoken when the NHL had its Global Series games in Prague that Russian players shouldn't participate. Now, ultimately, they did. They weren't kept from doing that. But, the fact that that's the view from those countries, those are the same countries that theoretically are going to participate in some way, shape, or form in the 2024 World Cup that's being planned. And they don't want to face Russia in a game. So, I think it's interesting that Bill Daly revealed that's been made, but it's going to be a very difficult situation, I think, for the league to maneuver. I mean, so far they've stayed about as apolitical as you can in it, I would say. I mean, they did shut down their Russian site, and they stopped doing some business with Russian companies. But, they haven't brought about any sort of sanctions or penalties against Russian players that play in the league. But, we might be, as we start talking about this event more and more, because, February 2024 is on the horizon. I mean, we're talking about 16 months from now. The planning is well down the stage of finalizing agreements with TV partners and where it's going to be played and all that. So as we start talking about those details, a big question is going to be, is the Russian team there? And if they are there, I would suspect some of these nations might consider withdrawing themselves. And so, it's going to, one way or another, as I say, the NHL stayed out of the politics largely of this dispute and tried to, carry on as normal. But I don't think they're going to be able to do that forever, because they're going to be forced to either, likely play a World Cup without Russia, or potentially play one with Russia and have a few other European nations not want to participate.
Slight topic change. Has it been announced where the next World Cup will be held?
Not yet. I think it's going to be held in a couple different cities. Wouldn't be surprised if one of them is in Europe to start, and then you have the final games played in a North American city. But it's not all locked down. I don't have the info, so I don't want to. I think there's still a few cities under consideration, but that'll rather than, if you remember, the 2016 World Cup was done entirely in Toronto. I think that there's going to be a little bit more variety there. It's hard to sell that many tickets to that many games in one market, even a big market like Toronto. The attendance wasn't as good at points of that tournament as I think organizers would like, and so they're looking at different ways to maximize the impact it can make.
And they're already not going to get a Team North America, so I completely understand why fans would be so disappointed.
Here's the thing about that, and I love Team North America as much as anyone. I was at the Team North America Sweden game, which was freaking electric. Like, Matthews scored a goal in the first minute that was crazy. You have the overtime when McKinnon ends it against Lundqvist. Like, it was an awesome game, but you're not always going to have that kind of collection of talent in any given under 23 class. And so I think that's the danger of maybe reviving it is that team works so well because those players are all the stars of the game now, right? Like, go down the roster. It's McKinnon, McDavid, Matthews, Johnny Gaudreau. You had Aaron Ekblad on D. Like they were stacked. Mark Scheifele, like guys that went on and on to have great parts of their careers. And a lot of them hadn't popped yet, right? I mean, in the case of like Austin Matthews, he hadn't played in the NHL at that point. Maybe in February 2024, we have the same circumstances. You got young Connor Bedard, right? But I don't know. I'm not an
Power, Matty Beniers.
Here's the thing. I haven't done the exercise. I haven't sat down and actually tried to figure out what it would look like. But I would have concerns if you put that team in the tournament and they lose every game 5-1. We might not think back on the experiment so well. So, yeah, the NHL said they're not going to go down that road. I mean, if I would guess, I haven't asked anyone this, but if they don't have a Team Russia, for example, I would imagine it's just another European nation that's going to get a chance to come in that wouldn't maybe be part of it. Ultimately, it was a gimmick that worked, but it was a little gimmicky, right? I mean, I hate to be like, I think they want to build this World Cup. Like, I'm pumped for the Soccer World Cup that's starting, next month. Like,
Next
month, buddy. I actually have some TSN colleagues that are going to Qatar this weekend because they have to be there early to set up and get ready. So it's that close. But I would say that you want to build it into where the nation, you're to more of the national event that it's intended to be. And so you've got to let countries come in. You've got to let maybe some of the weaker nations come in and deliver an upset. I think that's how you build it out. But that being said, rest in peace, Team North America 2016, because that it was a special time. It was a special team, and it really worked. And it's a shame they didn't get into the playoff round because it would have been fun to see them play Team Canada, for example.
For sure. That being said, like the last is the last thing I'll say on it, because if I end up talking about this team, there'll be a whole other podcast. The enduring moment from that World Cup is Nathan McKinnon beating Henrik Lundqvist. Do you remember anything else? I mean, I'm sorry, you were there, so maybe you're the wrong person to ask, but I can't pick out any significant highlight from that last World Cup that is more significant than Nathan McKinnon undressing Henrik Lundqvist. And like, sure, yes, Canada won, but like, there's no like one moment that like is better than that. I don't know. It was a cool time. It was a cool moment in history. Maybe we won't ever get it again, but long live Team North America. What
I remember, and I agree with you in terms of a moment, but I remember is how great Crosby was in that tournament and Marchand on his line. And, at that point, we're talking 6 years ago plus, Marchand maybe wasn't getting a lot of the respect that I think he's gotten since, because he was still at that point really associated with all the suspensions and things that had happened earlier in his career. And to see him play at that level, I remember how eye-opening that was. And obviously, like if we had NHLers at the Olympics earlier this year in early 2022, like I think those guys would have played together because it would have been that enduring. But, part of the reason we don't remember international stuff the same way we did is the story is untold, right? We haven't had chapters to read. It's such a shame we haven't seen best on best. That to me, the World Cup isn't perfect. I'd rather see the players at the Olympics myself, but we're at the point we have to see a best on best tournament. And so, I think that it's good news we're going to get one in February 2024. But as we mentioned here, there's some, it maybe won't be true best on best because some of the best players might not be eligible to play.
Speaking of chapters, have you ever thought about writing a book?
every once in a while, and then I try to bang that idea out of my head because I just can't imagine how much work goes into it. I respect all of our colleagues, anyone who's an author out there. I have like immense respect for the discipline it would take to write for that long and to produce something that long. I'm sure I'll get to it at some point, probably closer to when I'm in semi-retirement and have more time to do it. But I don't feel that compelled right now just because I'm have full respect for what a commitment it is.
Okay, all right. So no book for you yet. I would love to write a book. That's a dream of mine. I think I will one day, but yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm a little too busy to get a book done. Anyway,
I also
stick
think
taps.
you should have a certain amount of experience in your career before doing it. Now, there's some
Yeah.
exceptions to this, but like you want to have real perspective before you sit down and really try to put something that exists in book form, right? I mean, yeah, you got some years yet, my man.
Yeah. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's pretty good if you can get it for free. It's literally easy, man. You open up the website, you start writing out your description. You add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. And you can use simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/Johnston. It's CJ's last name. LinkedIn.com/Johnston to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Stick taps. This is where we show some love to someone either in the hockey community or adjacent or whoever we really want to, if we're really being honest. Do you have a stick tap? I have one that's a bit interesting.
All right, kick us off then.
My stick tap is for creative nicknames. I love creative nicknames in the hockey world. Feels like we've been short of them in the last little while. It's so easy now to look at a player and just shorten their last name or their first name and add like a Y at the end of it, or just try to make it 1 or 2 syllables. When's the last time you heard someone with a creative nickname or a great nickname like the Great One or, the Golden Brett at one point for Brett Hull, for example? Like there are so many great names.
The kids count as creative, or is that too not creative?
I feel like that's one of the last decent ones. Like we don't have a cool nickname for Austin Matthews. Do we have a cool nickname for Nathan McKinnon? What about for Cale Makar? Those are some of the great players.
Connor McDavid. Do we have any nickname for him?
I can't think of a nickname for Connor McDavid. So yeah, it's a damn shame we don't have too many creative nicknames going around the NHL nowadays. That might change with one player who we've already recognized through our segment, Arbor Jackeye. I don't know if you saw the tweet from Eric Engels at Sportsnet. He apparently had a little back and forth with him. I'll read the back and forth off his Twitter. Eric Engels to Jackeye, you need to come up with a more creative nickname for Yaroslav Slavkovsky. Jackeye says he's working on it. And then Eric asks him, what's yours? Is it X? Because Jackeye, for those who don't know, spelled XHEKAJ. And then Jackeye's like, yeah, and some guys call me Wi-Fi. You know how like a Wi-Fi password usually looks something like my last name? Wi-Fi. I love this nickname. I love it. And look, Jackeye's cool with it, so I'm cool with it too. Arbor Jackeye being nicknamed Wi-Fi gives me hope that we can come up with creative nicknames for hockey players again. I love that idea because I'm tired of just hearing, I don't know what we could call Connor McDavid or Connie or whatever. I mean, Cale is there for Cale Makar in terms of the lettuce. But like, come on, man, like give us something better, man. Like this is going to bring us to a whole other era if we can come up with a little bit more creativity for players' nicknames. So stick taps for those guys in those locker rooms coming up with creative ass names for players.
I've got a creative nickname, CJ.
Oh yeah, that's so great. Did you actually have like a cool, like I get called J Mac, which I guess is still not really like the most creative nickname, but like I guess CJ's yours, and I don't know if there's any other one.
When I was a kid, my nickname was actually Tiger.
Oh,
and it's funny. There's still people in Coburg that refer to me as Tiger. Like people that, if you've known me long enough, like the OGs, I'd say.
okay.
When I was a kid, I used to wear a Detroit Tigers hat that my neighbor had given me, and I was on a soccer team with a kid with the same name, and I was kind of an aggressive player, I think, like a little bit determined. And somehow my coach got calling me Tiger, and it stuck for many years I'm talking my youth. It has nothing to do with Tiger Woods or anything like that. We're talking even before Tiger Woods had really risen to prominence. And I was actually back in Coburg at Thanksgiving, and I was buying some groceries, and someone goes, Tiger. Like, and it was like an old friend I hadn't seen in a while. So yeah, anyway, but CJ is what most people call me around the industry these days.
Yeah. Tiger though. I mean, I won't call you Tiger on the show, but now I know you're Tiger. I'll remember that. What about your stick tap?
I'll just do a quick one. I'm going to stick tap the Philadelphia Flyers because we spent a lot of time hating on the Flyers or knocking them down. Not just us. I mean, I think the broader media world, the hockey world, they lose Couturier in camp. Ryan Ellis, unfortunately, doesn't look like he's going to be able to resume his career. And they what do they go and do? They reel off 3 straight wins out of the gate. I know they lost on Wednesday 4-3 to Florida rather, but let's give some props where it's due. I don't know where the season's going. Maybe they're headed exactly where we all predicted, but must have been nice to be in that dressing room, to work through training camp, and to give us all something to quit talking about. So stick tack the Flyers, at least while they have a good record in the standings.
Yeah, for now, we'll see how that lasts over the next couple of weeks. But hey, maybe they continue to prove us wrong and they end up being the biggest surprise in the National Hockey League. Who knows? Anything could happen in the National Hockey League. Siege, thank you as always. We will be back on Monday with a brand new episode. You can get your questions in now for Ask CJ. Be sure to check out CJ's newsletter as well. I don't know why my voice is going. But yeah, check out all the things.
6 a.m. wherever you're recording, bud.
It's like 7. Yes, it's 7:30 where I'm at now. It's very early in the morning. That's why I keep drinking these water bottles. Ask CJ, join the SDPN Discord, subscribe on YouTube. I believe the SDPN YouTube page just recently passed over 70,000 subscribers. So slow clap for everybody. Or you can do it a little slower than I'm doing right now. Yeah, anyway, I think that's all the housekeeping we need to do. We'll be back on Monday with a brand new episode. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long and peace.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.